Olive woke the next morning with a headache that pulsed behind her eyes like a second heartbeat and a body that ached in places she didn't know bodies could ache. Sunlight streamed through her curtains at an angle that told her immediately that she had badly overslept. She lay still for a moment, piecing the previous night back together in fragments. The party, the corner she'd claimed for herself, a server, a glass of something she shouldn't have touched. She remembered nothing after that. She got herself up slowly, made her way to the kitchen, and put on coffee with the careful, deliberate movements of someone whose head couldn't tolerate sudden motion. She settled into her living room with the mug cradled in both hands, and it was only then, looking around for her bag, that a new and more pressing confusion took hold of her. She had no memory of getting home. She had never, in all her time living in this house, brought anyone inside it. Someone had to have driven her, and she had absolutely no idea who. Her tote bag sat on the table where she didn't remember leaving it. She reached for her phone inside it, intending to check for some explanation, and froze the instant the screen lit up and the first message displayed itself in full. It was from Olivia. "Don't be alarmed when you wake up at my brother's place. I asked him to take you home and look after you. You scared me half to death last night." Olive read it twice, 3 times, her stomach dropping further with each pass, and then looked around her own living room in mounting confusion. This wasn't anyone's place but hers, which meant only one thing. Idris had driven her home. Idris had been inside this house. Her hand went back to the tote bag automatically, searching for the one thing it should have contained, and her fingers found nothing where her sketchbook should have been. Panic rose in her chest in one swift, vicious wave. She tore through the bag properly now, frantic, certain she was simply missing it, certain it had to be there. It wasn't. A small movement caught the edge of her vision. She looked up slowly, and her breath caught somewhere in her throat and refused to move. He was standing at the edge of her loft railing, perfectly still, watching her, and in his hands, held with a kind of careful, deliberate steadiness, was her sketchbook. She had no idea how long he'd been standing there. She only knew with a clarity that made the room spin all over again exactly what he now knew, exactly what pages he'd seen, exactly what secret had just been pulled out from under her without warning or permission. Her eyes burned instantly. She turned and ran, straight to the bathroom, and shut the door hard behind her before the first sob managed to escape. She had built a world for herself, quietly and carefully over years, a world that existed almost entirely in her own mind, with only its smallest, safest fragments allowed to spill onto canvas where no one but her would ever look. That had been the rule, unspoken but absolute. It was hers, it needed to stay hers, and now the one person who had never been meant to see any of it had seen all of it. Every page, every painting, every small devoted hour she'd poured into a man who had no idea any of it existed. She couldn't have said, even to herself, how it felt to have the very subject of her obsession be the one to uncover it. Humiliation didn't seem like a large enough word. Idris came down the stairs quickly once he heard the bathroom door slam and stood outside it, listening to the muffled, broken sound of her crying, guilt settling into his chest like something physical. He had expected this, more or less. He'd tried, more than once during the long night, to simply leave before she woke, to slip out quietly and pretend none of it had happened, but he hadn't been able to make himself do it. He'd even canceled his flight. He'd stayed up almost the entire night, fallen asleep only briefly in her studio, and by the time he woke, leaving discreetly was no longer an option. Someone would inevitably see a strange man walking out of a young woman's house at dawn, and that would only make things worse for her. So he'd waited, and watched her wake, and watched the slow unraveling of her expression as she pieced together what had happened. He cleared his throat, oddly nervous in a way he wasn't used to being. "Olive," he said carefully. No response, only the muffled sound of her crying. "I'm so sorry," he said. Still nothing beyond her quiet, broken breathing. "Just leave," she said finally, her voice thin and unsteady. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said. "I really didn't mean to." "Just leave," she repeated, weaker this time, her voice cracking further as another sob broke through. Idris realized, standing there, that this wasn't the moment for explanations. Whatever he said right now would only make things worse. From what little he understood about her, from what Olivia had told him over the months, about her shyness, her quietness, the careful way she moved through the world, he knew this was a girl who had spent years protecting an extraordinarily private inner life. And in the entire time she'd worked at his company, she had never once tried to get close to him. If anything, she'd done exactly the opposite, going out of her way to avoid him at every turn. The only reason they'd ever even met was because he had approached her, by accident, mistaking her for someone else entirely. Whatever this was, she clearly hadn't meant for it to go anywhere. She'd simply meant to keep it safely contained, hidden. Hers.
He looked down at the sketchbook still in his hands, and something told him this particular book held the very beginning of all of it. "Olive," he calls again gently, "can I take the book with me? I promise I'll bring it back." He waited. If she said no, he would respect it. Olive, on the other side of the door, wanted nothing more than to disappear entirely. How was she supposed to answer that? How was she supposed to ask the man who clearly happens to be the muse of the book and who now knew everything to please leave behind an object that contained the clearest evidence? "Just leave," she said instead, louder now, the words breaking apart as they left her. "Please, just go." Idris nodded to the closed door, though she couldn't see it, and after a long moment he took the book with him anyway, telling himself it would give him a reason to see her again, a way to make this right. After he left, Olive stayed in that bathroom for nearly 2 hours, crying until there was simply nothing left to cry. Everything felt ruined. Every careful, private thing she'd built over years, suddenly exposed, suddenly real in a way she'd never wanted it to be. She thought eventually, once the tears had run their course, that maybe it was time to build something different, a life that didn't revolve around a man who had never asked to be its center. She could go back to painting the things she loved before any of this had started: landscapes, skies, flowers, the quiet, unpeopled beauty her father had once devoted his own life to. She needed to close this particular chapter and bury it for good. She'd had her time with it, felt things entirely foreign to her sealed-off life, and now it was over. She needed to accept that and move forward. She knew with grim certainty that Idris would come back wanting answers, and she had no intention of being there when he did. She packed quickly, dressed, and left the house before she could second-guess herself. She had no energy left for travel that day. She'd woken already exhausted, only to be met with a humiliation that made the exhaustion worse. So she booked a hotel room instead and stayed there for 2 days, doing little but replaying every choice that had led her here. Eventually, she called her mother. It was, strangely, the only call she could bring herself to make, because her mother never asked questions, not out of consideration, Olive understood, but because she rarely cared enough to ask, and because she likely already knew more than she let on. Her mother had her own quiet ways of staying informed about Olive's life, uninvited but thorough. At least she could be trusted to keep things to herself. Henry would have come running the moment he heard her voice break. That was the very last thing Olive wanted. She didn't want to talk to anyone at all. By the 3rd day, her mother had arranged everything: a flight, a destination, no questions asked. Olive took it. Idris, for his part, spent the following days trying very hard not to think about what he'd seen in that house, and failing completely. It didn't help that he carried a constant reminder with him. The sketchbook went wherever he went now, tucked into his bag, occasionally pulled out and studied in quiet moments when he thought no one was watching. More than once, he caught himself smiling at the pages like an idiot, alone in his office, the door shut. He'd sent Daniel and Olivia on the business trip he was originally meant to attend, framing it as a kind gesture, a small honeymoon-adjacent getaway for 2 people who'd just gotten engaged, when in truth, he simply hadn't trusted himself to focus on anything resembling business. A week passed. Olive didn't come to the office, not once. Idris told himself he was being patient, that she'd return when she was ready, that pushing would only make things worse. He told himself this several times a day, with decreasing conviction. It was a quiet Saturday when his phone rang, Olivia's name on the screen, and he answered out of pure reflex, immediately regretting it. "Idris, I asked you to take care of Olive that night," she said, skipping any greeting entirely. "Did you do something to her? Did you say something? Is that why you suddenly sent us on this trip instead of coming yourself?" The questions came rapid fire, no room left for answers between them. "She isn't answering any of my calls. I've tried every number I have for her. Nothing. If you did something to her, Idris, I swear I will never forgive you." Idris went still. He hadn't realized Olive had cut Olivia off too. He'd assumed all this time that the two of them were still in contact, that he was simply the only one being avoided. He hung up almost immediately and dialed Olive's number himself, the one he'd been staring at for days without finding the courage to use. It went straight to a disconnected tone. He was in his car within minutes, driving toward the house he'd been meaning to return to all week. When he arrived, he found workers moving in and out of the front entrance, carrying things wrapped carefully in protective material, and the sight told him, before he even stepped inside, something he didn't want to believe yet. He walked through the open door without anyone stopping him. Inside, more of the same, canvases being wrapped away, furniture being covered, the unmistakable rhythm of a house being prepared for long-term absence rather than continued use. He found the studio in the same state, every painting carefully sealed away. "Where is Olive?" he asked, but none of the workers recognized the name. "We were sent by Marjorie Baton. Isn't that the mayor of Akana City?" he asked. They confirmed it. He left the house with more questions than he had arrived with, and that evening, using what little information the company had on file for her, he learned more. Olive was the daughter of Marjorie Baton, a mayor known by every account he could find for being formidably strict and fiercely devoted to her work. Her biological father, he learned, had been Hansi Golding, a celebrated artist who had died years earlier. Olive, it seemed, had come from considerably more comfortable circumstances than her quiet job as an assistant had ever suggested. She'd attended the same university he had, which explained suddenly all those early sketches drawn from a campus he himself remembered. Her academic record, when he found it, was exceptional. When Olivia returned from her trip, Idris attempted to explain the situation without revealing more than he had to. Olivia didn't accept a single one of his careful half-truths, pressing him until he finally admitted simply that he had developed a serious interest in Olive and intended to pursue her properly. This revelation delighted Olivia so thoroughly that she abandoned her interrogation entirely and spent the next several minutes praising a woman she'd known for barely 5 months, as though she'd personally hand-picked her for him. It was through this conversation that Idris finally learned the full story of how Olive had ended up at the company, how she'd come for an interview, lost her nerve, and fled, only for Olivia to intercept her in the hallway and offer her a job on the spot. For weeks afterward, Idris tried everything to locate her. He returned to their old university, but no one would share anything. The only address the company had on file was one she'd already abandoned. He could have contacted her mother, he supposed, but had no idea what he'd even say to a woman like that. Then, one evening, it occurred to him that he was, in fact, the CEO of the company Olive had worked at for nearly 5 months. He went to security personally and requested every piece of footage that had ever captured her, starting from her very first day. What followed was days of watching, alone in his house, the footage running on a loop. He couldn't fully explain why he found it so absorbing. Nothing about her routine was extraordinary, and yet he studied every detail of an ordinary life he'd somehow never noticed. The ways she laughed when she thought no one could see her, the careful route she always took to avoid crossing his path. He had spent his entire adult life being watched by shareholders, employees, cameras at every gala his father insisted he attend, and had never once stopped to genuinely watch someone else. It occurred to him, uncomfortably, that whatever Olive had been doing in that art room of hers for years was, in its own way, an act of attention he'd never offered anybody. He found the footage from her very first day, her hesitation at the entrance, her nearly turning around before she'd properly arrived, and felt an odd chill at how close he'd come to never meeting her at all. He found footage confirming what he'd begun to suspect, the careful detours she took to avoid him, paired with quick, stolen glances whenever she thought herself unobserved. He even obtained footage from Olivia's engagement party, calling in a favor from a friend who owned the venue, and watched it from a wider angle than he'd witnessed live, her isolated corner, positioned, he now realized, in his own direct line of sight the entire evening, which explained rather a lot about the server's tray going unnoticed. But his favorite, by a wide margin, was the footage from Olivia's office, the day they'd first properly met. He genuinely couldn't understand how he'd mistaken her for his cousin, even briefly. They looked nothing alike, yet there he was, arms around a complete stranger for far longer than the moment had felt live, and there she was, frozen, a parade of emotions crossing her face so vividly that he replayed the clip more times than he'd admit to anyone. Eventually, he began taking screenshots, isolating frames, refining them, collecting them with the quiet dedication of a man absorbed in something he loved. For days, he didn't show up at the office. He ignored every call and asked simply to be left alone. 2 weeks of this brought his father's patience to an end. His father had built Hamilton & Co. from very little and handed it to his son expecting it to be run, not neglected. He left voice message after voice message, each sharper than the last. Idris answered none of them. He sent instead a single text, brief, final, leaving no room for negotiation. He was done living someone else's dream. He was going to find himself. He packed a single bag, the sketchbook tucked inside, and got into his truck. His destination was Akana City. There was exactly one thing he intended to do there: find his Olive. Akana City was smaller than Idris expected and quieter, the kind of place where people still slowed their cars for pedestrians without being asked. He'd booked an appointment with the mayor's office before even leaving the capital, since that seemed the only legitimate way to get near that acclaimed, tough woman. He arrived early on the day of his appointment and waited for hours. Eventually, someone came out to tell him with the blankness of a rehearsed excuse that the mayor wasn't available after all. He didn't argue. He booked another appointment a week out and told himself a week was nothing. When the day came, he arrived early again, waited again, and was told again that she wasn't around, while people with later appointments were ushered in with warm efficiency. He got only apologies that didn't sound like they meant anything. He booked a third appointment 16 days away. By the time that date arrived, Idris had stopped being surprised and started being something closer to furious, though he kept it buried. He recognized exactly what was happening, the choreography of being deliberately avoided. He'd done it himself, more than once, to people he had no interest in meeting. The same calm excuses, the same carefully scheduled inconvenience meant to make a person give up. He didn't give up. He sat through the same routine a third time, the waiting, the excuses, the secretary's apologetic face, until something in him gave out. His eyes moved to the door he knew the mayor sat behind, and with a calm, immovable determination, he stood, crossed the room, and pushed it open before the secretary could rise from her chair. By the time she reached the doorway behind him, he was already inside. To his surprise, she didn't try to force him back out. She simply pulled the door shut, leaving him standing there, facing the woman behind the desk. Marjorie Baton didn't look up. She sat with a stillness that suggested she'd noticed him the instant the door opened and simply decided his presence didn't merit her attention yet. Idris stood in silence, feeling, for possibly the first time in years, genuinely unsure of himself. He had run boardrooms, negotiated deals worth more than most people saw in a lifetime. None of it had prepared him for the weight of this woman's indifference. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, finally. No response. "I've been trying to meet with you for some time now," he tried again. "Well," Marjorie said, still without looking up, "I have been trying not to meet with you, in case you hadn't noticed." "I had noticed. May I ask why?" She looked up at last, expression unreadable. "I see no value in meeting with a jobless man." A dry amusement crossed her face. "Hamilton heir Idris quits leadership position to chase his dreams." She recited the headline like an unimpressive grade. "Tell me, what percentage of those dreams involve my daughter Olive?"
Idris was startled enough that it showed. He'd assumed her refusal to see him was about her schedule, her temperament, not that she already knew exactly who he was and why he'd come. "You know who I am," he said. "Of course I know who you are. You're the man who's been asking questions about my daughter all over the capital, snooping around like a stalker." She said it without heat, simply stating a fact she found distasteful. He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I apologize. I'd really like to see her." "Why?" "He wants to speak with her," and Marjorie let out a short, unimpressed laugh. "If you knew anything worth knowing about my daughter, Mr. Hamilton, you'd know she isn't much of a talker. Don't waste my time. Until you can articulate exactly why you want to see my girl, get out of my office." He tried to argue. She didn't budge. He left and came back the very next day. He didn't bother with an appointment this time, just walked past the secretary's protests and found Marjorie mid-conversation with two associates. She looked at him a long moment, taking in the sheer stubbornness required to come back after being thrown out twice, then dismissed her associates. "I want to meet Olive," Idris said, before the door had even closed, "because I want to show her exactly how much she means to me. I want her to know she's all I can think about." "And how, precisely, do you intend to show her that?" "The same way she showed me. I can't match her talent, but I'll try." Something flickered across Marjorie's face. Surprise, maybe. The first genuine interest she'd shown him. "I didn't realize you were an artist. This is going to take you a while." It took her quite a long time to fill all those sketchbooks and canvases with your uninteresting face. "I don't intend to take that long." "You sound very confident." She studied him. "Fine. I'll admit she had an unhealthy fixation on you, but that doesn't mean she loves you. She's left all that behind her." "It doesn't matter whether she loves me," Idris said. "I'm not looking for her because I think she does. I'm looking for her because I love her, and she needs to know it." Marjorie said nothing for a long moment, something like quiet satisfaction crossing her face, though she gave him no time to examine it. It was, in truth, gratifying to learn that her introverted, sealed-away daughter had captured the attention of a man who seemed, by every account she'd gathered, genuinely decent. Walking away from a company, defying his own father, chasing a woman across the country with nothing but her general direction to go on, that spoke for itself. But she knew her daughter. She knew exactly how Olive handled situations she found unbearable. She ran from them. Left to her own devices, Marjorie suspected Olive would spend her life quietly avoiding this man rather than risk being loved by him. Someone needed to close off the exits. It might as well be her. She thought briefly of Olive as a child, small and watchful, always more comfortable with a crayon than a conversation. Marjorie had built her own life out of sheer forward motion, never standing still enough to be hurt, and had expected, foolishly, that her daughter might learn to do the same if pushed hard enough. It hadn't worked. It had only taught her to disappear more thoroughly, to mistake invisibility for safety. Marjorie wasn't in the business of admitting fault, but some quiet part of her recognized, watching this stubborn man in her office, a chance to undo some small portion of the damage she'd never known how to avoid causing. "Mr. Hamilton," she said slowly, "as far as I understand, you and my daughter have never had a single real conversation, never properly met. So where does this love of yours come from?" A small, helpless smile pulled at his mouth. "I think that's the most beautiful part of it. I don't know her audibly, but I feel like I know all I need to know. She owns my mind without even trying. I can't get her out of my head, and even if I could, I wouldn't want to." Marjorie watched him, something unreadable behind her eyes. "Please," he added, quieter now, "can you tell me where to find her?" "Of course I can. I have one condition." He told her immediately that he would agree to anything. "You will cherish my Olive exactly as she is," Marjorie said, and for the first time something genuine and unguarded crossed her face, a flash of something like grief. "You will never try to change her. Her whole life she's had a mother who tried to change her. As long as I'm alive, I'll keep being that mother to her, because that's who I am, and I can't seem to stop myself. She doesn't need another version of that, not from you." "Why do you want to change her?" he asked. She took a slow breath. "She's the opposite of me in every way. Soft, emotional. The world doesn't reward people like that. She needs a backbone." I don't think strength looks the same for everyone, and I love her exactly the way she is. You'd better, Idris Hamilton. Marjorie's voice dropped, low and steady. I have everything I ever wanted in this life. Power, respect, a career I built with my own 2 hands. But the most important thing is my daughter. If you ever hurt her, I will end you, even if it's the last thing I do. She looked like she meant every word, and something in her gaze sent a genuine chill down his spine. He wasn't afraid of the threat itself, he had no intention of ever giving her reason to follow through, but he understood finally the full weight of what he was asking permission to be part of. Either way, after the whole interrogation, she told him where to find her daughter.